Buona giornata, I am Vilfredo Pareto, known as a pioneer of elite theory, the father of the 80-20 principle, and one of the founding figures of modern sociology and political economy. Welcome to Socio-Exploration. In this video, I'll guide you through the journey of my life and highlight the key contributions I made to economics, political theory, and sociology, from uncovering the patterns of wealth distribution to exposing the mechanisms of elite power and human irrationality. I was born on July 15, 1848, in Paris, France, to an Italian noble family that had fled political persecution. My father was an engineer and supporter of Italian unification. My mother was French. We returned to Italy during my childhood, and I was raised in Genoa, where I was exposed to classical liberal ideals and the belief in reason, liberty, and free markets. From an early age, I developed a passion for mathematics, philosophy, and classical economics. I graduated from the Polytechnic University of Turin in 1870 as a civil engineer. But my true interests lay in social theory and political economy. I spent 2 decades working in industry, where I held high-ranking positions in railway and iron companies. These experiences gave me insight into the practical workings of capitalism, inequality, and the human motivations beneath economic behavior. By the 1890s, I transitioned fully into academic life. I succeeded Léon Walras as professor of political economy at the University of Lausanne in Switzerland. There, I began to publish some of my most influential works. One of my earliest discoveries was the observation that income and wealth are distributed unequally, and that this distribution follows a predictable pattern. I showed that a small percentage of the population controls the majority of resources, a pattern seen again and again across countries and eras. This led to what is now known as the Pareto Principle, or 80-20 rule, where roughly 20% of the causes produce 80% of the effects. But my inquiries did not stop with economics. I turned to sociology and political theory, seeking to understand the non-logical actions, emotions, and instincts that truly drive human behavior, often more than reason. I argued that most decisions are not made rationally, but are justified after the fact by logical derivations. In my major sociological work, The Mind and Society, Trattato di Sociologia Generale, 1916, I laid out these theories, emphasizing how residues, underlying drives, and derivations, rationalizations, shape belief systems and institutions. Though my ideas were controversial and later misused by political movements I did not support, I remained committed to observing social patterns objectively, without moral judgment. I viewed history as cyclical, not progressive. For every revolution, there is a reaction. For every elite, a challenger waits. I died on August 19, 1923, at my villa in Céligny, Switzerland. While I was best known in my lifetime as an economist, it is in the field of sociology and political analysis that my work has had its deepest and most lasting impact. Throughout my career, I sought to understand the deeper forces that shape society, not just economics and politics, but the irrational drives, the recurring structures, and the predictable inequalities that define human behavior. Let me now share with you the core ideas that came to define my sociological vision. 1. The Pareto Principle, 80-20 rule. One of my earliest observations was quite simple, yet remarkably powerful. A small number of causes often produce the majority of effects. While studying income distribution in different countries, I noticed a striking pattern. About 20% of people controlled roughly 80% of the wealth. This pattern repeated itself in other areas: land ownership, business success, and even social influence. This became known as the Pareto Principle, or the 80-20 rule, a concept now widely used in economics, management, and data science. But this was more than a numerical curiosity. It revealed a fundamental truth. Inequality is not accidental. It is systemic and deeply embedded in the structure of society. 2. The circulation of elites. I argued that in every society, power tends to concentrate in the hands of a small elite. Whether in monarchies, democracies, or revolutions, the names and ideologies may change, but the pattern remains. A ruling class rises, consolidates power, and is eventually replaced by a new elite. I called this process the circulation of elites. No political system can eliminate elite dominance. It can only shift who holds power. And over time, elites tend to become corrupt or ineffective until they are replaced, not by the masses, but by new elites more adept at capturing power. 3. Residues and derivations. I believe that most human behavior is not driven by logic, but by instincts, emotions, and non-logical residues. People act based on deep psychological patterns, then justify those actions with intellectual or moral reasoning after the fact. First, these underlying, stable drives I called residues, things like the need for social approval, stability, or action. Second, the explanations we offer to rationalize our actions I called derivations. In short, we do not act because we reason because we act. This insight challenged the idea that humans are primarily rational beings. Instead, we are creatures of emotion, ritual, and habit, cloaked in the illusion of logic. 4. Logical versus non-logical action. Building on this, I distinguished between logical actions, which are based on clear cause-effect thinking and aim at specific goals, and non-logical actions, which are based on tradition, emotion, and social symbolism. I argued that non-logical actions dominate human society, especially in politics, religion, and mass movements. This idea helped lay the groundwork for later sociological and psychological theories of ideology, propaganda, and collective behavior. 5. The foxes and the lions. Elite psychology. Among elites, I saw two dominant personality types. First, foxes, clever, manipulative, flexible, pragmatic rulers who rely on persuasion and cunning. Second, lions, strong, conservative, forceful leaders who rely on tradition, authority, and strength. Societies fluctuate between these types. When one fails, the other rises to replace them. This was my way of showing how power is not just structural, it's also psychological. The traits of those in power help shape the stability or fragility of the regime. Over the years, I published works that ranged across economics, sociology, and political theory. My writings sought not only to explain society, but to uncover the often unseen forces, economic patterns, elite structures, and irrational behaviors that govern it. Here are my most significant publications. 1. Cours d'économie politique, 1896 to 1897. While teaching at the University of Lausanne, I published this 2-volume textbook on political economy, written in French. In it, I refined and extended the work of Léon Walras and introduced ideas that would eventually shape microeconomics, especially in the area of utility and equilibrium. It was here that I first began to express my skepticism about purely rational models of economic behavior. 2. Les systèmes socialistes, 1901 to 1902. This 2-volume work was a critical analysis of socialism, not from a political standpoint, but from a scientific and sociological perspective. I argued that socialist doctrines appeal more to emotion than logic, and that redistributive systems often end up creating new forms of elite dominance. 3. Manual of Political Economy, Manuale di Economia Politica, 1906. In this Italian-language textbook, I developed many of my economic theories more fully. It includes my famous formulation of Pareto optimality, a condition where no one can be made better off without making someone else worse off. This became a foundational concept in welfare economics and modern microeconomic theory. 4. Trattato di Sociologia Generale, 1916. Translated later as The Mind and Society, this was my masterwork in sociology. In this massive treatise, I laid out my theories on residues and derivations, the circulation of elites, Logical versus non-logical action. Psychological classifications of ruling groups. This book positioned me as a central figure in early sociology, alongside thinkers like Weber and Durkheim. 5. Transformations of Democracy. Posthumous, 1920s to 1935. Though I did not publish a single volume under this title during my lifetime, several of my essays, written in my final years, were later brought together and published after my death. In these writings, I explored the changing nature of democratic systems. I argued that beneath the surface of popular rule, elites continue to dominate. Democracy, like other systems, merely shifts the composition of those in power, rather than eliminating the rule of the few. Many of these reflections appeared in the 1920s and were later translated and compiled in 1935 by scholars who recognized the enduring relevance of my theories on elites and revolution. I did not aim to flatter society, I aimed to reveal it. Power shifts, inequality endures, and reason is often a mask for instinct. If I am remembered, let it be for uncovering the patterns that quietly rule our world. Do like, subscribe, and click the bell icon for further notifications. Grazie e buona giornata.